Hi, this is Pete Eckman with the RoboZone podcast. This is our 163rd episode of the RoboZone podcast. And John, before I get to you, one of the bucket list teams that I've always wanted to interview since I started this was this team right here. But before we introduce them, let's introduce you, John. John Wolfert from Kettering University. How are you doing today?
I'm doing great. And here at the First Robotics Center, the teams in here are moving towards getting moving robots on the field here. And some of them are right there, right? They have, chassis and frames and stuff that'll move a little bit. But we are, it's exciting watching this because we haven't got to do this for 18 months plus, right? 2 years, really. And it is so exciting to watch this and still watch the kids. And even the mentors are like, this is so cool. This is so cool. So it's a great thing. And I'm glad we're back.
And we love being back. This is our second episode this week, believe it or not, John. So
yes, it is.
And I can't wait to ask some really good pointed questions to these guys. But before that, let's welcome Alan and Mason from Team 3847, Team Spectrum out of Houston, Texas. How are you guys doing today?
We're doing very well. Thank you for having us.
Yeah, we're doing awesome. Ready for the interview.
If no one knows who Team Spectrum is, John and Mason, just give us a little bit of an intro of what Team Spectrum is. How long you guys been around, so on and so forth.
Sure. So Spectrum has been a team since the 2011 FRC season. We actually started from two different schools. So we're an all-boys school and an all-girls school who happen to be right next to each other, but we're completely different school boards and everything. So we have different money. So it's all getting that all organized is always interesting. They actually used to compete against each other in the best robotics competition. And then the students decided they wanted to do something more. So they decided, they talked to the admins, the teachers and everybody, and they decided they wanted to start an FRC team. So they were rookies in 2011. I joined the team in 2012. They were looking for some more experience and I happened to have some connections here. So it worked out that I was able to be brought in. And we've been doing this now for over a decade. A lot of things going through of just managing to build up the program with those two teams from rookies. And as we did it, since I had a little bit more experience, I was a first student in high school, so I'm an alumni. And I'd worked with another team for about 5 years prior to starting to be the head coach of this team. We wanted to be able to kind of do some things differently, and I got the students to buy in early on that we were going to be pretty open with our whole processes. So from that 2012 season where I joined, we've had myself and all of our students work to basically publish everything we're doing. We have the build blog going, not quite nightly anymore, but as much as we can throughout the season, posting our progress, very open with how we do the season and kind of just what it takes to do this robot thing as well as we can do it and kind of hoping that other people can follow along and learn from us as we go.
Now, Ethan and Mr. Stockton that we interviewed from 118 said you guys are the polar opposites of them. They are very hush about their robot and their design. And they said, once you get Alan on there, he's going to tell you everything. So I appreciate that as a mentor myself, only being this our fifth season, but truly like our third season because we've been out of it for a little bit, with COVID. But you guys, your build log, our blog, I follow it. I follow, Open Alliance, that Discord. If no one knows what we're talking about, look up Open Alliance Discord, join it. It's just a plethora of information, especially when you guys started doing your testing on your climb. And we'll get back to that in a little bit. I don't want to waste that. But we have James with us right down here. So James, please introduce yourself.
I'm James Cole Henry. I'm head coach on 95. I was a student on 95 back from 2001 through 2005. Mentored a little bit when I was in college and came back full time as soon as I graduated. And
James's team's also on the Open Alliance. So go join that Discord and follow them too. Thank you guys and your teams and everyone that started that. I think that is a treasure trove of information for teams that if they're stuck, It's just another resource, probably better than Chief Delphi, and I'm going to get flamed for saying that, but that's fine. It's fine. It's a joke, ongoing joke here. Sometimes you just have to take that with a grain of salt or sugar, depending if you're salty or if you're sweet, whatever you want to say it. But you guys in the Open Alliance on that Discord, it's an amazing amount of information, and thank you guys for doing that for us, everyone. Right, just like 118 and the Everybot. The better we can train the students and get that knowledge out there and inspire them, the better off we all are as mentors in our teams, and that camaraderie that starts to build with those teams, and they go off to their college, university, aspirations, trades, which we don't have enough people for the trades nowadays. Anything to inspire those young men. So thank you very much. The reason we have you guys on today, the center point of this episode is wrapped around the manipulators that we're going to see some ideas. You guys both have manipulator ideas out there in the Open Alliance. So Mason and Alan, I want to start out with, when you guys started the season, how did you guys analyze the game and then start your prototyping process for the manipulators that you're going to use this year?
Sure. So first of all, how we analyze the game. I mean, obviously, scoring balls is the main component of the game where you are using manipulators. So two components of that, obviously, intake and shooter. On the intaking side, what we initially thought was the right path was a static intake. So one that we would deploy and would be fixed down and then would, collect balls as you rolled around. Initially, we were thinking maybe 2 or even 3 rollers in the whole process of getting the ball from the field into our robot. So how we went about prototyping this? Actually, in the prototyping process, after we experienced some difficulties with the weird tensions we were getting on our 3D printed parts, we decided to build a whole new prototyping system, which I called the proto-rectangular prism. It's kind of a silly name. It's based off the original name Protocube, but it's essentially just a rectangular prism built by 1x1 aluminum parts that we can use to modify the heights and positions of rollers to kind of get some prototype experience down and have a bumper there to simulate what a real front of a robot would look like. As soon as we built that, we looked back at the game, and we actually looked in our closet back at our 2019 robot. Our 2019 robot, for those who don't know, had a floating intake. What a floating intake is an intake that is set on a free axle in the back and will go up when you're intaking a ball and kind of ride with the ball. This assures a couple things. One, it maintains more contact with the ball, which makes it easier for the ball to come in. Second of all, when you impact walls or things like that, the intake will automatically fold up. It provides a variety of benefits. Yeah, so when we looked in the closet and looked at the game again, we kind of connected the dots and realized, because of the nature of the game, that being you intake like 1 or 2 balls, you don't intake mass quantities of balls at the same time as you did in, say, 2020 or something like that. We wanted something like a floating intake, one that could take in 1 ball at a time, because it would have to go back before reaching for another ball, one that could maintain that contact, especially with the big and somewhat unreliable balls this year. Regardless, we decided to switch to a floating intake, which meant, alas, our proto-rectangular prism was no use. I'm sure it'll come into use in future years, but so we had to kind of remodel our prototyping strategy for that. We actually did use the proto-rectangular prism. I'm not gonna say the whole thing every time, but essentially we just used it to test some intake plates, test how the roller went up and down on the ball. And we got some positions down, and we've gone pretty far with the CAD. So that's just a little bit about our manipulators.
Start prototyping a manipulator for your robot intake.
We leaned pretty heavily on taking high-speed video of roller prototypes. We tried a bunch of different types of wheels and what we call car wash elements, flaps of Velcro or different kinds of Velcro, carpet grip material and things like that. We identified a few things that we liked related to compression and how the ball rolled, or rather doesn't, slips against bumper material, and then went straight into designing our final, or the collector system that will go on the robot. We're still fiddling with pulleys and wheels on that, but given our particular set of resources, that's what we chose to go with. We didn't have a lot of opportunity to prototype and iterate this year, unfortunately. So we designed a system that could be flexible and adjusted in the future if we need to.
So James, I personally want to thank you as the head mentor for my team, that we watched that high speed video. And if people haven't seen that, that was amazing amount of information that it just helped us. So we
Right.
took that knowledge and we're using, I don't want to put too much information out there for my team yet. There's too many Michigan teams that are going to watch us. But we
But we're
use that
talking open
information.
alliance,
Yeah, just be
buddy.
open, man.
Yeah.
I am on the Open Alliance. Okay. So we use
Put your toe in the water.
yeah, I'm chum in the water. Oh, yeah, that's fine. West Coast products, we use the little blue or the little black compliant wheels, sucks
Yep.
those things in like that. I mean, just like that. Now we learned from both James and you guys, Alan and Mason, that we went with a different perspective. We went with a internal intake, open bumper design where the ball comes in, and we designed the wheels to right when it passes the bumper, that it sucks it right in, and it's it just lightning up. And the reason we did that is that we found that defense, we thought, was going to be a huge part of this game. Because there's only 11 balls per team on the field, people are going to be battling over a ball. And us being only fifth year, we're trying to look at things so we don't have to fix broken stuff. We don't have that many resources yet. So rather than, and yeah, Mason's already having a headache, a migraine. That anytime you post, we learned from 2020 when we had a past the bumper intake, it wasn't active. We couldn't pull it back. Once it was out, it was out. We learned even at week 0 at Kettering University, we smacked the upright, and it just bent it to all get out. And we just had to go with it for that season, right? Because of the resources that we had. But we learned from you guys, both teams, and that's what we went with. So the next question I have to ask, because we're talking about intakes, is Alan and Mason, what do you guys think about the defensive piece of this game? Do you think that people should really be looking at that when they're designing these past the bumper intakes, or putting some more strength and rigidity around those, or more flexibility?
So I can start this one. So that was a big reason why that was part of the reason why we made that switch that Mason was talking about, from kind of the static multi-roller out of the bumper intake to the floating intake that we went with. Because we were basically able to dramatically reduce how far the intake sticks past our bumper. So the intake roller itself is only 6.5 inches away from our bumper now. So that gives it a much lower lever arm. So if someone comes in and smacks it from the side, there's less force back onto like the intake pivot. The pneumatic cylinders are fully inside of our frame. Our motor's inside of our frame this year, so it's all belted out. So none of that can be damaged. The way we actually design and manufacture our intakes going back to the 2019 season is they're all done on a dead axle. So we don't have a hex shaft sitting outside a frame like a lot of teams do. We have a 7/8 tube, and we spin the roller on top of that tube. So that's a rigid frame member. You want to talk about more about like the plates and kind of the sandwich material and stuff?
So when going into the intake design, one of our top priorities, especially considering that defense was probably going to be a large part of this game, we had to make it very rigid and was able to withstand pretty much a lot of impact. So with that in mind, we used double plates on each side. So the way we designed our plates is that there would be 2 sets of plates on each side with a set of standoffs in between them to increase rigidity and to help prevent, if one plate breaks, the other can still stand and the intake can still work even in the middle of the match. We took inspiration from, say, 148 at the Texas Cup in 2021 and a variety of other teams in that regard. But so that's one of the things we did for rigidity. Once again, like Alan said, with the floating intake, a lot of the problems in running head-on in collisions with like walls, say for going for balls, or if a robot, I don't know, somehow messes up our intake from the front, we should be covered for that. And the rigidity is to help with any side impacts that we might experience.
Yeah, so it's still made out of Lexan, so it's still not super rigid, like it's not an aluminum box where it's going to potentially bend. If it takes some side load, it'll bend and flip back, but it's not going to crack like we've had some other 1/4-inch Lexan intakes break in 2021, to where we were swapping sidearms and stuff still, even though we built an intake similar to other people. It still wasn't quite good enough over an entire, that was actually just one event. We only got to play at the Texas Cup for that robot, and we still cracked one of the side plates. We also just made sure the intake width the whole way down is a lot wider. So if it does crack, there's room enough that we could like put in a patch panel or something if we need to, right in between a match. Just anything we can do to make sure that maintenance is fast, things are quick. The dead axle assembly allows us to change rollers incredibly quickly. We just take off 2 bolts, the whole roller comes off, we can swap in a new spare. There's a lot of things like that that go into making sure that this design is going to be able to work and be able to be iterated throughout the whole season, as we actually get to test it, as it gets beat up from defense. That's also one of the reasons why we actually don't necessarily like the bumper gap, is when there's defense, if you have 2 robots with a bumper gap, they can almost like hook into each other and it's hard to pull away. So having that full wrap bumper is one of the things we always strive for every season. So we can kind of like slide past teams if they're trying to defend us. Our bumpers are always made of slippery sailcloth. And so that's actually another part of that. I think we talked about, you guys all talked about, is that balls slip over the bumper a lot. So we had to figure that out. So we have a kicker bar that deploys at the beginning of the match that'll have some traction material on it. So the ball is not riding up the bumper, it's riding up that bar. And that brings it in, because if it's on the sailcloth, it was just never coming up. It would just spin on the carpet forever, basically, on a bunch of our prototypes. As soon as we put that bar down there with like the silicone tape, it ramped right up at even low speeds. It was totally fine. So yeah, so that's kind of where we're at with our intake currently.
It's kind of funny, but we figured if someone's going to impede on our frame perimeter, we're going to get some points anyways, because there's laws against or rules against that, right? I know it's this, but from my experience in Michigan, anytime someone goes inside another frame perimeter, those refs are very quick to enact that rule and then award points. So
yeah, it sometimes
3
works. We just
points.
thought we saw it be a headache for a lot of teams in 2019. Like you can go back and watch 2019 champs videos, and there are teams who just got locked up and could not get back to their feeder station stuff because they had that open gap.
Right. It's driver's training that we have to do. I got that. We're also a swerve bot. I know I threw the S word out there, but that's I'm training my driver. We started last night that if you see someone coming in and you think that you're going to get hung up, just spin the robot around real fast and try to get around them. So I'm doing that in driver's practice.
Yep.
James, how are you guys handling the defensive piece of this? When you designed your intake, did you take that into account? How did you build robustness into your intake mechanism?
I'm going to take a half a step back first. I think a through bumper collector can be a really good choice for a lot of teams because it's static, because you don't have to deploy it, because you can hit walls with your bumper instead of your intake. So we almost always design over bumper intakes for full width collection. We've been doing it a really, really long time. And we train our drivers at a level to which they can utilize it, but that doesn't make it the right call for everyone. Some teams are absolutely best served by a through bumper intake. So to answer your question, in the past, we've built really like 1/4-inch aluminum plate collectors that you could just smash through the side of the field with, and those work, but they are really heavy. And if somewhere in the middle of the roller, there's always a sensitive spot, and if you clip that, it's going down. So since 2014 and on, we've almost always gone with a flexi compliant type of intake. This year we're using a 4-bar linkage to let the whole collector collapse if we hit something. In 2020, we had this really weird spring-loaded kind of, it's very similar to the intake Alan's describing, where it will swing out, collect over a ball, and then pull back in. It had its pluses and minuses. We did, in fact, run into one of the pillars at full speed, and the whole intake just closed and then came back out and worked again. Which, yeah, exactly. This year with the 4-bar, it won't be that robust. There are some bigger cross shaft. There's more mass in it, but there's also less danger of running into a a central pillar. We're also using polycarbonate linkages so that if it gets hit from the side, there's a lot of compliance in that direction. The intake can rock side to side many inches before anything becomes a problem. We have done motors inboard. This year we are trying motors completely outboard. We have a bit of aluminum sheet metal that fully encases them. So it's unlikely the motors will take a direct hit, and the chain runs are very short. They are very rigid. The motors and the two collector shafts are very rigidly connected. With our floppy intake, we had issue throwing belts and chains off as things rocked side to side. So we wanted to avoid that this year.
What made you choose chains over belts? Just, so other teams know.
We just have a habit of using chains instead of belts. We can buy 30 feet of chain and then know we can make whatever size we want.
Yeah.
It's really a matter of convenience for us. They package a little more, they package a little narrower than belts do for the same torque carrying capacity, which is nice, but they wind up being a little heavier. So for us, it's mostly a convenience choice.
Master keys. I hate master keys and half links.
So we don't use master links. We occasionally use half links for low load applications, but I think Vex Pro has a version of the Dark Soul chain tool where you can make master linkless chains, and that's I hate master links too. It is the only way to go. Yep.
Only way to go.
We'll chalk that up for next year's robot.
Vex, Rev, Andy Mark, they all have chain tools that do it.
Yep. Is there something else? 6328 published a video where they just took their intake and slammed it into a wall. I think more than once. And I recommend every team with an over-the-bumper intake be confident enough to do that sort of testing with theirs. If you're not, then you're either going to have to train your drivers to be pretty conservative, or you're going to have to bring spare intakes to each event. That sort of just slam your robot into a wall as fast as it can go is testing that everyone should do.
Both. I think you need to do both, right? Bring additional intakes in.
That's fair. That's fair.
I think if I said to my driver, I said, go full bore into the wall. He will not hesitate to do that. However, we'll wait until off season to do that. We'll stick with the internal.
I mean, if you don't do it now, it's going to happen in a match at some point. So you might still do it ahead of time.
But I have an internal intake, so I don't have to worry about slamming it into something.
Exactly.
So you might not worry about your intake. You might find that your battery comes loose.
Well, you also might find your intake hits the truss head on. Even though it's internal, that truss is a corner. You can smack that intake directly head on full speed still.
Oh no,
that truss does not mess around.
He's hitting everything underneath the sun in driver's training. Trust me, we're practicing the durability of the robot without purposely practicing the durability of the robot. So
there we go.
Because we just started driver's training yesterday. So,
excellent.
Because I think, and something that I think that's going to be big with this season, and we kind of covered it when I talked to 118 on Monday, was no matter how long you've been around, you may have a rookie set of driver and operators this year because of COVID, because you've had people leave the team. You might be having a really green drive team. So that's why I said I love week one events. We're going to a week one event because I think it's the fairest. I think it's the most level playing field. No matter if you're a 5-year team, if you're a 2-year team, or a 20-year team, everyone's kind of new to the game. So, that's why I like week one events.
Yep, we're doing a week one as well. We also like week ones.
Yep. Us too.
So we'll all find out that first week what's going to happen. So we talked about intakes, right? Let's talk a little bit about when we talk about manipulators. You're manipulating the ball all the way through the conveyor, if it's conveyor system, to get it up to the shooter, right? So where Team Spectrum are you guys going with as far as a conveyor system or an indexing system? Are you really indexing the ball? I thought it was kind of easy this year with how big the balls are to easily index. You're not trying to do 5 like infinite recharge. So where are you guys with that piece?
Yeah, so I think that's actually, that was one of the more, I think one of the bigger surprises we had in that early week was just how compliant the balls are and kind of going where you want them to. It's the exact opposite of the 2020 infinite recharge balls, that if you left them any little space, they were going to find their way into that space. The people on our build blog last year there's a video of the ball getting stuck into like the craziest hole in our drivetrain ever. We had to like disassemble the whole thing to get it out. That does not happen in this game, which is very nice. So our conveyor is largely just a set. The intake roller is a certain width. We drop, I think, 6 inches to the next roller, another 6 inches to the next one. So like on the rollers funnel, there's some funneling along the sides. So the balls can get kind of centered in by themselves. We don't have any like active centering wheels or anything like that. It sort of just happens with the rollers as they're coming up. And then we're early on in the season, we were planning to do a turret. And we backed out of that for some space reasons and some complexity reasons and time reasons. So now we went to the more, I guess, kind of conventional this year, close to an S curve where we have a feeder roller that rolls it up a curve and into our launcher. And so that's kind of what the ball manipulator system is going to look like.
So you're shooting the same way out as the ball's coming in, same side?
No, opposite. So it is opposite.
So you said
yeah.
S, so I'm,
Well,
okay, okay, now
The ball should take
Okay,
like a
right.
serpentine path,
Yeah.
like this.
Yep. So it serpentines up and out
Okay.
around the first roller and then out
Right.
over the launcher roller.
you'll always try to be pointing at the thing. And I see we have a new chief technologist, James. That's your chief technology? Chief engineer?
That's his driver.
Yeah, this is my daughter Anna. She hangs out at Robots, or at least did in the before 4 times. Can you say hi, Anna? No, we're having a little grumpy time.
That's called
Which
an
is-
assisted hello.
Yeah.
So, James, where are you guys with as far as your conveyor system? You doing an S? You doing a simple like I call it an L, kind of like the West Coast Products one that they did this year, which was kind of like their 2020, minimum competitive concept. Are you which way did you guys go?
We basically recycled our 2020 recipe for that. We have the intake on the back of the robot. We're shooting from the back towards the front. Instead of a conveyor belt, we had a funky curved conveyor belt in 2020. This year, we just have a single 4-inch Coulson wheel, and that is the whole of our indexing system. We're using 2 4-inch mechanism wheels to singulate coming out of the intake. For us, that packaged with basically no effort. Yeah, hi. Can you see yourself in the camera?
It's internet gold. Keep going, James. Keep going.
The vectored intake wheels, we've set them up to pull the cargo down towards the bottom of the robot. It eliminated a failure mode where if 2 balls entered the intake at just the right time, the lower one would kick, the second ball would kick the first one up between the collector and the indexer tower. But changing from static 4-inch wheels on the singulator to Coulson wheels, or not to Coulson wheels, from Coulson wheels to mechanism wheels to get a little bit of downward pull on the cargo, solved that problem completely.
Nice.
Oh,
So
cool.
it sounds like you guys got 2 different sides of the house, but yet it's gonna completely work. So
Yep.
my next question wrapped around a launcher, shooter, whatever the nomenclature you want to use, ball delivery device, has been the ongoing joke with us this year, or cargo delivery is, are you guys focused on the high goal or are you focused on the low goal? Which one are you guys doing for Team Pix or Spectrum?
We are focused on the high goal of the high hub. We are planning to be able to launch in the low hub if we need to. So if we're trying to do some quicker cycles, make sure our shooting percentage is high, we'll be able to kind of pop them in over at the fender. But largely we're focused on the high goal. It's an interesting task this year because it ended up being, I think when a lot of people first saw the game, they're like, oh, we're just shooting balls again. It's easy. We can recycle all the stuff we've been doing for 2 years. But it ends up being a little bit trickier than that as we started seeing teams start showing video of the balls kind of popping out of the hubs. We started seeing this kind of spin out stuff. And we started really looking at the problem more and we're like, okay, this is a little bit different. We have to look back at some of the stuff we learned from 2017 and like how the funnel worked in that year and how kind of what the goal was and how to get the balls in. And largely we're figuring out how to reduce the energy on the ball so that there's less spin, there's less kinetic energy as well. So we don't want the ball having a super high arc and coming in, so it's able to like just hit on the wheel that's in there, that 6-inch or the 8-inch pneumatic tire that's in there and bouncing out. We don't want any of that. So our goal is basically to have very little spin, have it just crest over the rim, land in super nicely, and actually stay in. So we have some different prototype video up on our build blog where we've kind of seen it doing that, where we had to play with it. And as we ramped up the velocity, it was a lot easier to see that the balls had a lot more energy and were bouncing around way more if we had that higher arc. So once we kind of turned it down, we're able to get that adjustable angle to where we could push at more of a shallower angle towards the goal. That it was able to make our shots a lot more consistent in the prototyping stage, at least. And hopefully that'll all pay off when we get to the competition robot here in the next few weeks.
Going low, are you doing both? Where did you guys decide with that?
We're planning on going high. The reason we made that decision is that we wanted to optimize our playoffs performance, not necessarily our qualification and ranking performance. Teams who want to qualify really well might be best served by shooting for the low goal as fast as they can. We knew we could be good at one or the other, but not both. So we picked the high goal in hopes that with a high scoring potential, a high offensive power rating, we might get picked rather than having a lower scoring potential and being an alliance captain.
So it's very interesting you guys say this because we went the opposite like you guys did. Since we've only been around, we're still young in our infancy in first. We concentrated on the low goal, at least for week 1. But we designed the conveyor / ball delivery device as a modular design so that for week 1, we can pivot to the low. And then for week 4, we can put a pivot and then go high or low. So we were trying to think of the season as not just one robot, but something that we could iterate between weeks 1 and 4 so that we could try to we want to establish ourselves for ranking points. We feel because we're so young, we just want to be a picking alliance. That's what we want to do. We want to be in position to pick. And at a low with a swerve and only having 11 balls, we thought, and not being able to touch the balls, if you score 1, you have to wait till it hits the ground or another robot, and looking at that rule, that it made the best decision for us to do low first. And then we can always spin. If we could put a pivot in really quick, it kind of is like a tank almost, kind of turret.
Yep.
If you pivot it up or you put it on an active axle for week 4, spin the motors harder, you can hit the high if you need to. But, we wanted to make sure week 1 was our goal and have max driver practice to make sure that we can do what we say we can do, especially with that week 1 right there without the bag, right? Because we talked about the bag before we started taping. This is no bag day. This is the first full season of no bag day because everyone's season got cut 2 years ago when we started that. So,
yep.
Greg and
we
go ahead.
hope this is the first full season.
John, don't start like that. Don't put that out there in the ether.
I'd like to expand on something you mentioned there.
Yeah.
Designing your robot and conceiving of your robot as evolving through the season is, I think, absolutely the right mindset. We used to try to get all of our features crammed in by week 1, and often we're very unhappy with the results. But the last couple of years, our robot function and priority list isn't one-dimensional. It's not just a prioritized list. It's a prioritized list through time. And we say for week 1, we want these features. For week 3, we want those features. For district champs, we want maybe these crazy features. And that has served us incredibly well in planning out and allocating our efforts and resources.
Yeah, we interviewed a couple of weeks ago Clinton Bollinger from 2337, and he brought up that idea of running your seasons not just about week 1 where you're trying to get the robot and that's it, right? It's looking at what the end could be and then trying to plan your team. So we're learning that process as we go and try to do as many design elements now that we know we can implement and modify later so that we're not redesigning the whole robot. It's just, little tweaks. That's what we do in IT. I'm an IT guy. So, you know, when you code a application, and I'm going to get flamed for this too. It's been a while since I've been a coder. I manage it now, but you know, those minute details, the ones and zeros, is just try to plan for a little bit of the future. So I'm trying to install that mindset in the kids. So my next question, and one of the favorites that I've been waiting to ask, and I'll start with Team Spectrum, is about the climbing at the end, right? The traversal climb specifically,
Right.
because you've seen all kinds. You guys came out with one of the first kind of ideas, and I've seen the iterations as you're building. Are you planning to hit traversal in week 1, or is that something that you guys are going to iterate and get to at the end?
The goal is to have the traversal for week 1. The mechanism we're building should be able to do it. Whether we do it every match and stuff is a lot dependent on how much are the points worth, where are we at with the ranking point, what can we secure, that sort of thing. So it's very possible we may not need it, right? If we only need high bar because we can do high bar and a mid to get the ranking point, that may be all we do. It just kind of depends on strategically where it's at, because it might not be the fastest thing. We have to get the whole robot built, try to make sure we can automate some of the process so our driver's not having to manually move the winch and things. That would make the climb way worse. So that's part of what we are looking into, though, is how can we have sensors on it so we know that we're fully retracted and like we're on each bar, all of those types of things. We can use software to make that faster and more reliable. But yeah, so our climb, like I said, many people have seen the videos. It's probably one of the things that we released the most that people were following with. It took a lot of different iterations. It kind of started from just having the students up at the whiteboard on day 1, drawing out different ways that we could do the kind of monkey bar sketch.
So many bad ideas.
Yeah, not necessarily bad, just, you know, incomplete concepts, right? And we walk through all the time. We walk through and we basically say, hey, all of these ideas, someone's gonna do them, right? Like that's the thing. Like, even though we think they're not the ideal and optimal for a certain reason, but somebody's gonna love them. And I've seen teams who are implementing most of them in some way. Like different arms, like the multi-arm extension things. Like we've seen teams figuring out how to make kind of everything they drew on the whiteboard exist. And our goal was to basically figure out how do we do this and look at it from a challenge of not just how do we apply like other old game end game tasks, like kind of the elevator kits and things that are out, or the climb kits that are out, but how can we really analyze the task, figure out what is it that we have to do, what is this problem, and then what's the solution to it that is easiest for us to build and package and implement into our robot. And so as we were doing that, we figured out, okay, the first reach and getting to the bar is not trivial, but it's a common task that we've had to do in many, many years. We know how to put something, extend it. We know how to pull it up with a winch or anything like that, chain, elevator. But that next task was the big thing. Once you're latched and you're kind of up on that mid bar, how do you extend something outside of your frame past the high bar in one direction? And then when you pull it back, how can it have a different path to where it actually pulls you off the high bar and pulls you to, or pushes off the mid bar and pulls you to the high bar? And that was kind of that problem scope that we were just sitting and talking and analyzing. And I was literally like waking up in the middle of the night thinking about for like that first 2 weeks of the build season was, what is that trick that allows you to deploy something and then pull it back in that slightly different arc with the kind of the least amount of stuff and material, so that we can keep it light. It doesn't take up too much of the room. We're not designing our whole robot around it. And that's kind of where we were at the beginning. We had this kind of like single jointed arm that would have worked, but we had to get like the CG exactly right. Like there are a bunch of like all these compromises that we had with a bunch of our other systems. And then as we were going, we were looking at a couple past years robots. Several teams like Wildstang in 2020 had a double jointed arm. Celtex up in Canada did. There were a few others that had this kind of same concept. We had these double jointed arm that would fold out and then pull back down. And we kind of realized that would allow us to both extend up for the mid-bar pull, but then on the second one, you're kind of extending out and up, which is what you kind of have to do to be able to grab that extra bar. And so once we kind of realized that was kind of how we wanted to package it, it was how do we get the hook under the bar and then over to pull down. One of our alumni mentors actually came up with just using the pneumatic on that bottom link to be able to hold it down while we're extending it. And then once you extend the pneumatic cylinder, it grabs the bar and pulls you in. And that solution seemed to work really well. We kind of sketched it all out in CAD. Nothing looked like it was going to fail. It looked like it could package into a very tiny robot. That was the other thing. Our robot's very small this year. We're only 24.5 wide by 27. Yeah, 27.
27, yeah.
27.5 long. So we're a really small package. So we had to get the climber stuff all packaged down into that really small size. So all of that kind of was how do we the double joint allows us to do that. We don't have to have any linear extensions. So we're not worried about bearings everywhere in the same way that all those arms are. We have to worry about the winch and the rope, but that's relatively easy. We have some nice new ways we're doing that. We have some ratcheting, tensioning systems up on the arms so we can keep the ropes in balance with each other. There's a lot of work that's still going to be, like we're talking about, changing and iterating. We know we're going to be iterating like the hooks and the latches throughout the season, almost certainly as we get to like the real field and everything compared to ours. All of that things will change, but we're pretty sure the geometry itself is good enough to do the task. And then we'll just work through dealing with the swinging, dealing with other robots, all of those things that are going to come up as we start playing the game in that hangar zone. We'll be able to work through and make it better.
Gabe, how are you guys? Are you guys going to have a traversal for week 1? Are you going to iterate?
Yeah,
to
we're
that
just
point?
copying Spectrum. We modeled out 5, 6, 7 different designs, and every one of them had a flaw or a snag or something that just, it didn't sit with us, and we thought this is going to be a failure point. This is going to bite us in the butt. This is going to be a maintenance nightmare. And when Spectrum published their climber, it was like, oh, I want that. That's perfect. We had all the same packaging constraints they did. We have a very similar robot layout. So I asked Alan a few questions. I modeled it. We modeled it in like a day and stuck it on the robot. And was like, oh, yep, this is perfect.
So you were being literal. You're borrowing.
I very nearly literally copied them. We have a sheet metal sponsor, so we changed a bunch of their parts that are like Versa tube and Versa block related to be sheet metal stuff. That's it.
Yeah,
We're
James and I
using
talk
comparable
regularly.
motors. Sorry, go.
Oh, I was just saying we talk regularly, so that helps that you can get the design stuff easily.
Yep. It really does. So yeah, we just kind of massaged it a little bit to fit our robot and our construction style, but the core mechanism is all them.
And that's
And
what
we're
it's all
crossing our
about.
Yeah, we're building it right now. We're hoping to test it Saturday, question mark. But
And-
their work that they've published for everyone is giving me very high confidence that it's going to be fine.
So you're
And
gonna
so-
video that and put it out there, right?
I hope so. That's especially if it crashes and explodes. That's
Those are the ones people really like. But
Yep.
as for us, this actually, when they decided to do it, it actually is a super, almost like relieving feeling to us when we know other teams are doing it, because it validates our design, right? So like for a little bit when we were running down that path, we don't know that we're not running into a dead end, right? We're just assuming that we're feeling confident. We're like, this seems to work. Everything's nice in the geometry. But until we start really seeing other teams take it and use it, and they validate it as well, we don't know for sure that it's a reasonable, good idea, right? We're always a little bit unsure of ourselves, just like everybody is. You don't know that it's going to work until it's on the field. But because we're open, we can start seeing other people use it. So it validates at least they think it's good. But we also, especially when other Open Alliance teams use it, and other teams, or at least who tell us they're using it, we get feedback and we get what they find doesn't work. So it's like almost having other teams working on our design for us, right?
Just
The
same
things
idea
that
with
James
open source
finds
software,
and they
right?
change their latches or hooks, we're going to see it and we're going to be able to make our robot better because they're testing it for us,
Right.
Thousands of miles away. So
Open
it's really
source
nice that we're
software
open.
process.
Yeah, it's the open source software process
Yep.
that started years and years ago that, yeah, you're just, this is genius. This is open source engineering process, kind of like, right?
And you know who benefits the most, John, is the students do, right?
Yeah,
It's
they
the-
get to see new ideas, better ideas, different ideas.
Well, let's take it back. I remember Deep Space, right? It was our sophomore season, Deep Space. Now, if you ever ask me, hey, how would you get on that top of that box? And someone says, well, with a vacuum, I would have never believed it. But there was a certain team in Michigan that designed it, and then you had certain teams that copied it, and you saw it as state champs. I'm like, okay, it's not like, iterate, pick a path, see what you want to do with week 1, where you want to go from there, and then be exposed to what you see at a comp, because right now no one has seen the game played yet. So I'm sure there will be design changes throughout all the teams, right? I have to ask this question though too, especially with traversal, because you guys both said you're traversing to the traversal. How important is it going to be for the alliance to actually talk to each other when it comes to the climbing, especially from the mid? Because I love the Everybot design this year. I love it. I just interviewed the guys. Amazing that they put that out there. But and when you see their release video and you see them haul butt and they skip over the lowest one and they hit that mid one, I'm like, I don't want to be right behind them on the high one because that thing's just going to come off. So we've even designed safety hooks, a separate set of hooks, just to make sure that once we're on something, you don't fall. I don't like to see my robot fall. I don't know about you guys, but are you guys worried about that, Team Spectrum? About
we definitely are a little bit. So that's definitely, it's going to be more of a conversation in terms of timing, I think, this year than it was even in 2020 when you had to line everybody up on the truss or on the hanger that year. Just because the order matters so much in which way you can come in. So we're swerve as well. So it's a little bit nicer that we can slide in from the side and things if we need to, depending on where we need to start. If there's somebody on a low bar or something, we can kind of get around them. But it is still going to matter a lot of who's on exactly which side, when they're going, who's getting to the bar first. And like you said, yeah, people driving in fast to get that mid rung may or may not be important. So hopefully a lot of times it may just be multiple robots on the low bar and somebody on the mid. If you do 2 lows and a mid, you still can get or 2 mids and a low, you can still get it. So you can make things work to get the ranking point without having to take those risks. And then once you're into the playoffs where it's your alliance, you can plan that a lot more. Maybe even get a practice field session before, during lunch to try to be able to time it a little bit up, make sure everything's working. You may have to be sending one of your traversal climbs super early to make sure they're out of the way. So all of those are going to matter. And that's one of the reasons why as the season goes on, ideally our traversal time is going to get shorter and shorter and shorter to where we're down in that sub 15-second time frame where we can get it out quicker so that we're fully out of the way of the teams coming in fast to the mid bar and those types of things. Because yeah, we've done some testing of trying to knock ourselves off, even with a relatively light robot. It was pretty hard to get us off, even just the climbing hooks, not our actual latches. It was pretty difficult to knock it off. But if an Everybot comes in and lifts us up, yeah, it's gonna come off.
right.
So hopefully we can avoid that scenario. But just getting knocked, we'll just swing more. And I think there's gonna be a lot of robots bumping into each other, swinging together. The last time we've really kind of seen this level of interaction on the bar is going back to like the real old days, my sophomore year of high school in 2004, when we had First Frenzy and you had the 2 alliances hanging on the same bar. And so we've seen that it's definitely doable, that you can have robots face to face hanging on the same bar if you need to. We've done it in the past. Those videos are really grainy if anybody wants to go watch them, but they exist. So it is relatively tricky to fully knock a robot off the bar, but it can happen. It definitely can.
And you don't want to be that robot. You don't
No.
want to be the robot. When you hear the come out of the crowd, you don't want to look and see that's your robot sitting on the ground. James, how are you guys handling this? Have you guys talked about that last 30 seconds or just going into the hangar and climbing and how the alliance is going to have to talk to each other?
Yeah, end game every year is always a negotiation. You'll have teams that you'll be halfway through an event and they'll say, we have a traversal climb, but we're not sure how long it's going to take and we really want to try it. And I mean, part of me wants to say, oh, let's just do what we know we can do and win the match. But most of me says, I'll make sure you start with enough time and go for it. And if you fall, you fall, and we'll try to be out of your way or climb up after you if we can go faster. So it's always something that's cognizant. It's always something that we're aware of. And especially in recent years, it's been a big point of pre-match strategy is often it'll be, okay, you climb at 30, we'll climb at 20. Our last partner, maybe, let's say this year it's an Everybot climber, is like, you wait till there's 2 seconds left on the clock, you give it full stick and see what happens, to give everyone else as much time as they can to get out of the way. I think that's part of the beauty of the Everybot climbers. I bet if you set your drive motors to coast, you could be full stick and disable the robot and it would probably still climb, which is pretty wild.
Isn't it? Because think about it, this is like T-5 this year, right? So you don't have to be climbed right at 0. It just has to be a T-5. So
Yep.
yeah, full send, coast mode, click, click, Up and on. I just don't want to be the robot behind that when they're full center.
Yep.
Right. So I think we've done the world of first justice that you guys have provided, the input that you have. First of all, you guys are on the Open Alliance, which again, thank you guys for doing that. That's amazing. Those teams that don't know what that is, they're listening to this, go out and get it on that Discord because there's a ton of information out there. So as you sign out, okay, tell us again what team you're from and then how we can follow you on social media. And I'm going to put that in the show notes too, as well as a link to the Open Alliance Discord so people can get on there and start learning. So we're going to start with you guys from Team Spectrum. Tell us who you are and how we can follow you guys.
All right. I'm Mason. This is Alan. We're Spectrum 3847. A couple ways to follow what we do is at our website, www.spectrum3847.org. We also have a blog at blog.spectrum3847.org. We're on Instagram, Twitter, and Facebook with handle Spectrum3847.
And
Yeah,
thank you
that's
guys for coming on board. James, you're up.
I'm James Cole Henry with Team 95, the Grasshoppers. We are just on Chief Delphi and the Discord server. Feel free to reach out on either one. We'd love to answer specific questions. Don't be afraid that just because it's our build thread, you can go on there and ask us detailed questions about the design, because if you have one, someone else definitely will too.
And I would be remiss, and John would get upset at me if I didn't bring up the Kettering Week 0 event, which you can go out there and register for right now, right, John?
You can register for the Kettering event. Gail supposedly sent out a note to all the teams in Michigan. And we look forward to that because that's part of First Michigan training.
Right.
Yeah.
And we're going to be streaming that.
That
RoboZone will be streaming.
And RoboZone,
Yep.
and you and Denver, I assume.
Yep.
We'll be there. We'll be streaming it, talking to people, looking at successes, looking at failures, because you really learn more from failures than you do successes. And that's the time to figure that out. But I really want to say thank you, you guys, because the Open Alliance kind of concept, open source, however you want to look at it, being a software guy too, is to me one of the greatest forms of gracious professionalism you can have, right? But then it serves both. Like you were saying, you can't test everything in every scenario. But boy, you get a bunch of people out there who are testing in different robots, different configurations. You're getting pretty much everybody testing stuff for you too. And it also, opens up a lot of the ability when teams, sometimes the teams out there really don't know how to prototype, right? They think they do, but when you see what you guys are doing and stuff like that, it's like, oh, we can do that. Oh, wow, look at that. We can build that. Hey, what if we do this instead? And then they can try something new and maybe it works better. So it goes into that open source kind of a thing, right? I think what you guys are doing is just great. And I also wanted to remind everybody out there to look at some of the past episodes that we've done through this season, through what we did. We did some great ones over the summer with IBM Research on AI, where things are going, right? And on blockchain and stuff like that. I know it's not necessarily, the blockchain isn't necessarily within robotics, but AI and stuff and where things are going is. And for anybody who's interested in that kind of stuff, there's some really cool things going on out there. I think from our perspective here at Kettering, there's some teams here that have come in right now, and they've been practicing and, well, at least prototyping like craziness. It's a cool thing to see and to hear, 8 teams here just building and doing things, and it's just like, wow.
Well, again, thank you guys. We will check in with you in a couple of weeks since you guys are week 1 events, right? I will check in with you and maybe bring you on board and tell us what you learned from week 1 events so that we can help again, because you guys are part of the Open Alliance, get that information out there to help everyone that maybe in a week 2, 3 or so on so forth. So thank you guys very much. I wish you guys a great night and thank you for what you do for us.
Thank you very much. Appreciate everything you guys do.
You're welcome. Thanks for having us.
Thanks for having us.
having us.